Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. I'm one of your hosts, David Reid.
And I'm your other host, Christian Meyers. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Medevac podcast. If you're new here, there's a price for the show. You have to share it with a friend or family member if you're getting something out of today's episode. We've got a pretty radical guest today. He's got a pretty interesting story, too. It's a unique one.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we've got David Vobora. He is a former linebacker for the Rams and the Seahawks and the founder and CEO of the Adaptive Training Foundation, where we're currently at.
Yeah, man. I'm glad you guys have been able to do some pods in here.
Thanks for having us. This is quite the establishment, too.
Thanks,
man. You guys are doing great work. So we're going to dive into that in a little bit here, but let's kind of rewind it back and talk about who you are and how you got started. Before the show, we were talking a little bit about 3 generations of Marines that you come from, high-ranking officers as well. So can you talk about what that was like kind of growing up in that atmosphere, like why it inspired you to have such a strength within the veteran community?
Yeah, I was raised by a bunch of incredible patriots, and so I adopted those beliefs and, the importance of structure, of discipline, of sacrifice was eminent, and although my father did not serve, he played football. I was actually a linebacker at the University of Oregon. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon. Okay. And then, football was my path as well. His father, my grandfather, fought 31 years in the Corps.
31 years.
Yeah, flew Corsairs, flew Hueys, and then was rated in the Cobra and was teaching that before he got out. So pretty cool time within Marine Corps aviation and otherwise. And his dad was a full bird colonel. And then my dad's brother served, and then the other was, so anyway, there's a long line, like you said. And I think early on, it was like, I want to go hook and jab with bad guys, no matter what that looks like, And through the paths, my dad being a football player, my dad was really clear with me early on that, there wasn't going to be financial resources for me to go to college unless I earned it or I went to the military. Okay. And so, football was the armor that I put on and it worked out. I ended up being the last pick in the 2008 draft, making me the honorable title of Mr. Irrelevant. And I didn't know what that meant. Somebody was funny because most of my friends were drunk or passed out by the time I was drafted. But that call came in, they said, hey, don't worry about this Mr. Irrelevant thing. I didn't even know what that meant. Okay. So I looked it up and someone was like, the last pick wins a car. I'm like, well, I'm driving a scooter right now at college for the last 4 years. A car sounds awesome.
Sounds great.
And no car, but they do this whole thing treating the last pick like the first. They fly you to Huntington or Newport Beach, do a whole week, drive a Lamborghini, Disneyland, VIP, we went to Playboy Mansion, did all kinds of fun, crazy, cool stuff.
That's awesome.
But for me, it was like, there was an opportunity first week in St. Louis. That's where the Rams, that's where I played for the Rams. It wasn't LA. And they said, man, I think there was no player left in the building. Yeah. And they found me taking a pee. They're like, grab him, grab that guy. They're like, hey, we need someone to talk to this school. So, okay, yeah, I'll do it, whatever. And we're driving to the elementary school and I'm thinking what am I going to say?
I'm a professional football player.
Right. Which is cool, right? There's some validation in that. But what I said was, how many of you guys have ever been the last pick on the playground or at anything? Hands shot up. It's like, well, I was the last pick on Sunday night. It's not going to stop me, and it's not going to stop you either. So really quickly, I realized with the platform I had been given, tongue in cheek or not, there's a way to play the cards that you're dealt.
Absolutely.
And to do it with significance. Yeah. And so, changing the statistics on Mr. Irrelevant, obviously becoming a starter rookie year and going on, Brock Purdy, Niners quarterback, is really the guy who's changed the game for Mr. Irrelevance. But it is a way to have, some signature claim to fame, so to speak. I don't know, a lot of people think it's not the fame they want, but any attention, I'm going to use it for good.
Yeah, use it to your advantage. Yep. I want to rewind it back just a touch because you had a pretty prominent moment in your life being selected in the draft. I mean, very few people ever are. Yeah. What's that like? Yeah, the percentages of not just making it, getting drafted, but then making a team, but then making a starting roster is pretty significant. I don't know what they are off the top, but, you can call me Mr. Anything you want. I got drafted in the NFL. You know what I mean? I didn't, it was just a dream come true. And yet it was the foot in the door to do the real work. Sure. Mm-hmm. And, I think there's a lot of synonymous thinking and, obviously there's a lot of parallels between military and football. And by no means am I, considering them apples to apples because they're not. That said, though, right, there is this, trusting the man to your right and to your left, right? Being part of a unit, being elite, doing things differently, and recognizing
teams,
too.
I mean, it's the arena.
100%.
When you really look at it, we've actually talked. Several of our guests have been college ball, whatever it is, and they have been in the military, and the similarities are existing. Are existing there, and And yes, it might not be combat, but when you're on that field, I'm sure you feel.
Oh, dude, running down on kickoff in front of 100,000 people and another, a few million on TV is just insane. Oh, yeah. And I actually remember there was a moment when, we had some troops in that were active duty, and one of the guys grabbed me. These were some SOCOM guys, and they said, "Listen, when we're out there or get the opportunity to watch one of your games on a Sunday, we feel home. Mm-hmm. Not geographically, but where we are here in that anchor, whether you're our team or not." And that gave me a lot of pride. Again, going back to patriotism and the opportunity to serve those who serve now is my greatest calling. But when I got out of the NFL. Really my identity crisis was who's David without football? Sure. Yeah. And that's not that dissimilar to many of these vets, right?
Especially purpose.
Yes, exactly. That's the identity crisis.
Yeah. Losing that purpose. And that's a big thing. I mean, you go from all that electrified energy.
It's God complex. You can't find any drug, right? Like you guys know, stepping outside the wire, like there's no other drug on earth that could compete.
But also the freaking roaring crowd, you got that aspect.
And the paychecks are nice too.
Yes.
That's one advantage you have over the military.
Yeah.
Well, so you got drafted in 2008 and then you made your way out.
Yep. I was with the Rams for those first 3 years and then the Seahawks for the next 2, catastrophic shoulder injury into my career. But that was really the sort of the first domino in the really deeper thing, which was, and started with prescriptions, but it ultimately led to a huge opiate addiction, really just addiction on every level. Yeah. No matter what I could do to change my state, to not have to answer the question is who's David if this football thing ends.
Yeah. Now, did this kind of addiction come to fruition whilst in your NFL career, like towards the end? Or?
Similar to the military, you're on when you're on, and when you're not, you're partying, right?
Yeah.
And there's there's the nature of kind of that ride, and then all of a sudden, when you're no longer competing, you're no longer in the arena, so to speak, right? Then you have some of those same behaviors, some of those different things, plus traumatic brain injury laden on top of that, and some other things. You're impulsive, you're dopacentric, you're seeking that next fix, this other thing, this opportunity to. And I'll tell you this, man, and I'll be bold in saying this. Like, when I was 10 years old, 17-year-old neighbor raped me. It's a boy that I trusted. It's a boy that I wanted validation from. And that was the wound, and I say this with total certainty. Without that, I don't play in the NFL. Wow. What I did was put on the armor of football, because if I could achieve the outward applause of others, right, through football, they didn't ask me what the hell was really going on. Yeah. I was scared. I was broken. I was confused. I was ashamed. I had all of these things. So then it was about standing out on the football field, dating the hottest girl, right, or banging as many chicks as you can, or doing these things and partying or whatever. And so there was plenty of things that kept me, but then all of a sudden when the rug got pulled out, I got injured, right? Football all of a sudden is in question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was just to numb myself was really it, which led me as far as a painful rock bottom was drug detox in Seattle. 7 days, lost 34 pounds, puking and shitting all over myself, seizures. And this is actually a true story, was night 3, which anybody that's ever been through withdrawals, especially opiates, night 3 is just gnarly, man. It's like the bugs crawling in your skin and the like tremors and you want to pull your fingernails out. I came to and I looked on my plate and there's a hospital tray of food. And I was like, man, if I could force feed myself, because I hadn't eaten in like 3 days. I was like, maybe I can find some relief. I lifted up. It was tuna casserole. Oh, God. Much less hospital cold tuna casserole, baby. And I'm like, so I went to try to grab it. My hand still tremored, like barely able to open. And when I got up, I fell. I couldn't stand. Shattered plate, tuna casserole all over. I'm embarrassed. I'm on my hands and knees, scraping it up, trying to clean it up. Nurses rush in. I quickly realized they weren't worried about the mess. They're restraining me because they thought I was going to use the broken plate to slit my wrist. And just months before, I was in the stadium, Seattle Seahawks running down the field on kickoff, right? So like, how did I get here? And it was fear, it was ego, it was the identity crisis of that. I couldn't recognize that in the moment, but it took me a year out of football to get right, to get clean, and then recognize, man, maybe I do have something to offer, not just on the field, and maybe I need to pursue that. And the gym has always been a sanctuary, right? Sure. Like being able to get out what I don't know how to say, a little sweat equity. And so that sweat psychology side is where I kind of rebuilt myself and eventually led to, the work that I've done, dedicated my life to the last 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to unpack with that story. I mean, there's a lot. We oftentimes talk about adversity breeding resilience.
No question. The hero and the villain's origin story is pain. both of them, and you have a choice.
100%. We see a commonality actually across the board with special operations war fighters. Most of them have childhood trauma.
Goes back to the wound.
There's always those, that have gotten around that, have successful, parents that have, raised them great with great love, and they've gone on to the special operations community. But there's those, including myself, that went through a very rough patch. That makes you say, hey, there's something else out there for me.
Well, it's also like, hey, I've been fucked with. I'm no longer going to be fucked with. I'm going to be the baddest dude, and I'm going to do this. And you look, the darkness that you're plunged into is directly associated and connected to the amount of light that you're going to be able to give the world. I believe that wholeheartedly. Actually, that Navy SEAL Clint Bruce, where I started my gym here in Texas, his warehouse, he talks about the destructor becoming the healer. And that's the hero's journey, right? And so I think that, to similar backgrounds or otherwise, like there was something, and maybe it was the way we were raised, there wasn't abuse or otherwise, but like, did your dad ever make you mow the lawn twice? Right? I mean, because the lines weren't perfect. Right? I mean, 3 generations of Marines, no one told him he was loved. No one hugged him. So that wasn't done to me. Right? So there's this pathway. There's this, again, how do you break the cycles?
The generational.
And recognize too that like, it doesn't have to be this Goodwill Hunting moment, but at the same time, like, you can express your feelings, because anger was a thing to flex, to be, not feel, and then to achieve and surpass your peers in military or in the football landscape. And that works to get you, here, but it can't get you there. It can't get you to the next level.
Do you have kids?
I do, 3.
So you have 3 kids. So that's kind of an interesting topic as well, is what's the balance that you use, right? We go from 2 extremes. And we've seen both sides of it, right? Childhood trauma could have, the guy who goes after bin Laden, right? You could breed that. Or you have the kid who doesn't even appreciate the cost of a gallon of milk, who just sits around and be lazy all day.
There's an optimal deprivation there.
And how do you find that balance? How do you train that into the next generation of you?
So the first thing I've done is I've taught my kids, my last 4 years, a meditation, mindfulness, and breath practice has been the bookends of my day. In fact, peppered throughout my day. Done a ton of different, personal and professional development in those arenas. And for me, I've taught my kids that when they can't or don't feel like expressing their emotions, that they can get still and breathe. And then allow those things to pass through them, right? And the opportunity to be a conscious responder rather than an unconscious reactor. And with it, like my son, when he's angry, he's got it now. I've just told him, like, when you can assign a word to describe the emotion, say it out loud. So he'll be like, I'm angry, in his Hulk moments. I'm like, good buddy, allow that to be, right? Accept what is. And then also recognize too that in a fleeting moment, it can pass, right? Because I think, it's, you guys know about permanent solution to a temporal situation, right? These emotions, these feelings, they had their way with us. They create these thought patterns and we get ingrained in them. Where if we can get still, get grounded, then all of a sudden we recognize like, oh no, this is just a passing cloud.
Fleeting too. That's interesting that you're teaching your kids how to identify their emotions that early too. It's something that's very uncommon.
We weren't taught that, man.
I didn't learn that until maybe 5-6 years ago, how to truly identify and put a name to my emotions. And it helped me understand. But like if I had that as a child, I would have been a much different person.
Well, I'll throw out a tool for anyone that's listening, because I'm all about practical application, right? People can hear and like, oh man, I'm inspired, but then it washes off unless they have it rooted in something. And so a tool that I use, I travel a lot, do a lot of keynote speaking, for example. And before I get up, whether I'm nervous or not, I find 5 things I can see, 4 things that I can feel, right? And then literally sometimes you have to say them out loud or whatever. 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can, hopefully they smell okay, right? What's the inside of my mouth taste like? Take a deep breath and welcome back to the present moment. Because the amount of time it took you to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 through the sensory lens, it grounds you back. So people don't realize where we put our attention, that's what derives our emotions and our feelings, right? And again, it's not that you're like, oh, I'm turning a blind eye to this, right? It's not the fake it till you make it. It's if I can root myself in something that truly is not tied to the narrative in my head, but it just is what's in front of me, then I can interrupt that thought pattern. Now you can be a more present human. You can be better about not letting those emotions get the best of you.
Yeah, of course.
And that's honestly what makes the biggest difference between a successful speak and an unsuccessful speak is you could be as prepared as you want,
Yes.
And those nerves come in,
yes.
and you're thinking about it too much.
Yeah.
It's detrimental.
Well, because people don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel.
Yes.
And so, right, it's like that resonance thing. And if you're not in an alignment, if you're not, right, then the message itself is going to land hollow.
Yes.
That is, and I have to repeat that. It's not about what you say. It's about how you feel. And that's exactly it. It's the emotion that's associated. I often talked about this as, it's kind of just a pop quiz for people. Is like you feel like you own your own world. You're your own universe, right? You raising your eyebrows is the biggest thing in your world in that moment. No one else sees that.
Totally.
Right? And people have this tendency to think that they're the spotlight. Yep. And I always ask the question is like, well, what color shirt were they wearing when you were having a conversation?
Totally.
And they can't recall it,
totally.
right? Because they're too busy in their head worrying about their emotions, their feelings. And the same thing when you're on stage and you're talking to people about that.
It's crazy. They did a study. They put an experiment on a plane, and basically there was a plant, someone that knew that the experiment was going on, and someone that didn't, right? And basically the person that didn't, the guy that did, and was prompted, said their prompt was, hey, ask this guy only about him. Don't even share your name. Don't share where you're from. Don't share your profession. Nothing. Like, just ask about this guy. And eventually, when they two get off the plane, they stop the guy that didn't know this was going on. They say, hey, can we just ask you a few questions, like, for a survey? And he thinks it's for the airline. And they're like, hey, man, the person you sit next to, how did it go? Like, oh, dude, it was amazing, man. Like, it was maybe the best, right, that I've ever had. Well, what was his name? Like, oh, right? What was he wearing? What did he do? Like, oh, man, I can't even, right? Because the point is all that person next to you that was a plant, just ask questions about them. Yep. And it feels good to feel that, right? So I think that for people to feel seen, felt, heard, it's really just placing your attention, being present with people, and holding space, creating a container. And if that's too woo-foo for you, it's the give a shit to look someone in their eyes and not be thinking yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and oftentimes I'm sure you could resonate with this, is when you have a conversation with somebody, sometimes you don't say a word about yourself. And that person will say, that's the best conversation I've ever had, right?
No question. Yep. Yeah. So all that, I think, parallels, again, for me, my own practice, right? My own, again, like you can't, the Red Hot Chili Peppers give it away now, right? Like to keep it, you got to give it away. And as you're learning and growing and bringing the tools, I mean, the greatest gift that I've had is the opportunity to go out and explore things, guinea pig myself, and then bring them back to the tribe, and those are the types of things that I think are making this, culture at the Adaptive Training Foundation so unique, because the Trauma Olympics, right? You may have someone like, quadruple amputee. You may have somebody that physically looks totally fine, right? But pain is pain is pain, and trauma is trauma. Yes. And so if we are, accepting you into this program, then we know that there's some work to be done, and we believe that you're worth it, and you're going to be a force multiplier for those around you, as well as your family or your unit back home. Absolutely. And, it takes hundreds and hundreds of applications to take 10 for a 9-week course. Yeah. And so it's largely competitive, but it's also about, the only disability is a fixed mindset. Right? The growth mindset, the person that says, like, this is for me, no matter how much I don't like it, or I want to resist it, or I want to run from it. Those are the people that I want to do life with. It's a person that says, like, no, here's my scars, and here's how I'm moving beyond them. Absolutely.
Yeah. And in turn, whilst talking about it, you take the power away in those scars as well. So I kind of want to dissect that a little bit with you and talk about your journey here, because it's very unique having that self-awareness. And I think that does go with your lowest point. That's where it kind of is born from. Yeah. So where did that start with you? Where did you say, hey, you took a look around at your life. Yeah. Obviously you were on the field a month ago, and now you're on the hospital floor picking up tuna. Yep. Where did that start for you? Was it after the end when you shook that fixation?
For me, I grew up in church, Christian, very black and white, and that belief system served me well, I think, in a lot of ways. But it also, like, God was omnipotent, and therefore you couldn't be mad at God. So you think about that 10-year-old wound. I never really was able to bring that to God's feet, right? Or long and short is, one night I just had it out with God. Okay. Like just haymakers, right? And like a kid would with like a hand, the parents got the hand on the kid's head, he can't reach. Yeah. Eventually I got so tired, it was like, what I heard was, are you ready to listen? And it's crazy because at this time in my life, I was having a dream every night that I was killing my father, my earthly father, with my bare hands every night for about almost 2 years, choking him to death, punching him to death. And when I had it out with God, God said, you need to go to your dad and ask for forgiveness. Now, keep in mind, my dad he couldn't have rescued, saved, done anything to change the situation that occurred to me, right? I don't blame him at all. Yeah. But there was something that I was holding resentment against him. I was looking for that Goodwill Hunting moment, that it's not your fault, right? I love you. But he had his own stuff. He was doing his best with his own stuff and otherwise. Yeah. And so long and short is eventually I went to the moment I had the moment with my dad where I asked for forgiveness. And forgiveness is not about that person at all. It's about you and your heart. And when I did that, he said, thanks. And I remember just being like crushed because I needed more. Yeah. The truth is I wasn't ready for forgiveness on my side of the street. So almost a year to the day, the following year, I did the same thing. And he said, thanks. This time though, I didn't need anything. And that was the hugest shift because then I could actually have it out with God. And with that, realize that, man, that's equipping you. And it wasn't even a month later. I'm not joking you. I was speaking at TCU and it was I had never shared this on stage. And I felt compelled to. 600 incoming Greek freshmen. Afterwards, speech was at like 9 or 10 at night. Afterwards, till about 1 a.m., there was 200, 300 kids that stayed. Multiple saying, this happened to me, or I've been addicted to opiates, or I blame myself for my parents' divorce, so then all of a sudden I saw that the scars were the qualifying factors, not the disqualifiers. Yes. And in fact, through that, with the opportunity to be vulnerable, strength came in, right? And then purpose came in. And the opportunity to be addicted to opiates actually is a benefit to the amount of people that leave the VA with a tennis ball sized sleeve of opiates. Yeah. And so we can have that real hard car. Like, man, I've been in that pit, bro. Yeah. I was scraping tuna off the floor, you know? So I guess that gave me the permission. I've always feel like I studied psychology. That's what my degree's in. This is sweat psychology. Said a little black book right now. And like we use weights and conditioning to get their voice in their head loud. Yes. And then we unpack it in pre and post meditation, breath work, and otherwise. And so the thing I'd encourage anyone listening is, if the words that you're using, that voice in your head to yourself, if those were layered on the outside of your skin, would you still be beautiful? Would you still feel beautiful? There's a truth in science that if you put two plants bought from the same place, same strain, and you walk past one and you curse one out, the other one you affirm, and you're so beautiful, this one will wither and die, right? And so point being is the words that we use to ourselves are the most important. And then that actually is what will flow out of us. Someone that's flowing out with poison, think about how much poison they're drinking every day. So that's where we give them new tools, new habits, and equip them. And that's the piece too, is if I'm not helping others do the same, I'm not necessarily living it as well as I can.
And in turn, that's probably helping you through your journey. I mean, the way that you dropped that, I've often, I talk about on stage all the time too, about my injury and the night I was hit and all this stuff. And sometimes I have to remind myself that there's power in that story because I've taken the power away from it so much. I've said it so often that I look at their faces and I'm like, oh. So being grounded, being centered, before you go on stage and saying, hey, this is going to be an emotional moment. Yeah. Let that emotion hit, let that emotion hit the audience.
The human part.
Because it's their first time hearing that. Yep. But the best therapy I've ever had in my life was stepping on stage and giving someone that story so they could say, hey, my day sucked too. Yep. And there's the window, there's the door.
Synonymous human condition, baby.
That's it.
Yep. And when we look to serve, I mean, that was this whole story here, right? Is like when I had the opportunity to then, I got out of the league. We moved to Texas. I met Clint Bruce. He offered me warehouse space to run this gym. I was training some of his operators. Those guys weren't traumatically injured. We're at his 40th surprise birthday party 10 years ago. And Staff Sergeant Travis Mills, quadruple amputee, one of 5 combat injured that lived, truly. Yeah. He's there and I talk about it like he was the hot chick at the bar. I saw him walk in. I'm sure I was rude to whoever I was talking to and I beelined it right to him. I walked up to him and I said, man, when was the last time you worked out? And he said, I don't have arms and legs. You're kind of an asshole. What do you mean workout? Travis is a hilarious dude, right? You guys ever met Travis? He's the best. And, I said, well, I'm a former NFL player and I'll train you like an athlete. Yeah. He's like, athlete? And I said, well, he said, have you ever worked with an amputee? I'm like, nope. Actually, I don't even know any, not even a BK or anybody. I know. So let's start with the quad. Let's start with the most, that you could possibly hack off.
Start hard.
Let's start hard. And, then it had 2 guys, 10 guys, 20 guys. All were vets to start. And I didn't want to charge anybody. sleeping on yoga mats at the gym some nights not coming home. I had one child at the time. And my wife says to me one night, actually I get home and it's like one light on over the kitchen, like the interrogation room. I like, can I fake my death and make it to Mexico? Or anyway, she says, and she was totally calm. She says, do I have to be missing an arm or a leg for you to put the same type of focus and attention on me and your family?
Heavy.
But it wasn't she was just stating what I was blind.
Perspective.
As passionate dudes, right? You go all in on something. I was having the most fun in my life. But at the same time, I'm training the Staubach family and I'm training these elite athletes and NFL guys and Olympians and all this and making good money too.
Sure.
And this whole like, well, I got to choose. Well, it went easy. It wasn't even a choice. I just said, I'm going to close all this. Shut down the for-profit, went all in, started the nonprofit 2014. Adaptive Training Foundation was born, and there was no sponsorship. I didn't wait to have money. I was like, we're going to do this. We're going to build the plane as we're flying the damn thing. And, it's eventually birthed into, we've put over 400 guys and gals through this flagship 9-week course. They graduate here in Texas, and we take them on a week-long redeploy, which is adaptive skiing, snowboarding, surfing, climbing, rafting, whatever.
It's amazing.
But the real cool part is now of those alumni, even ones that didn't live here, 30 plus families have moved here to be a part of it.
Wow.
Of our operating budget, 20%, so roughly $400,000 a year goes back into the hands of the alumni athlete trainers. So they get NASM certified, they get equipped with vocational opportunity. Because again, those closest to the issues are best to serve, right? I may have trained 100 amputees. I'm not one. You are way more qualified than me, right? To do the work. And so that also gives them this sort of like for us, by us, this buy-in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just reminding them to fish, but giving them the tools and the habits and then the community to be able to do so. And so for me, it's like, tribe, it's a trendy term these days.
It's just going to go there.
But tribe is different than a roster, right? I've been on teams. That's roles and responsibilities, positions. And although there's a chain of command or a hierarchy necessary in any type of institution, the perceivable weakest person, least experienced, most impaired in here is an integral part to the sum of the whole. And without them, this organism can't function at its highest. And so it's empowering. And it's empowerment done on a scale where, they suddenly go, I'm taking ownership of this. And the leadership, our staff could not show up on a training day and this thing would happen without us. That's the mark of saying like, oh, we're onto something here.
And I was going to say, psychology guy yourself, there is so many aspects to that. We had a conversation with Doc G.
I love Doc G.
Fantastic. And we talked about this kind of bottom up and top down approach to holistic health in general, right? They're very focused on the brain, healing the brain. Here, we're focused on the body too, but there's so many other aspects to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people lose on the way out of the military, transitioning out into the civilian sector. All of a sudden they look around, that identity crisis that you identified yourself, but losing that sense of purpose. When they could come back into an environment like this, it's not just about working out.
Well, we again, 2/3 of who we serve are veterans and first responders, but the other third is civilian, and it's integrated for a reason, because I believe a veteran can be back geographically, but not all the way home until they've reintegrated with civilians and have a new tribe and a new ridgeline, right? And so when President Bush and Speaker Ryan came, I think it was 2016 or 17, W is looking at my men and he says, thank you for what you did in uniform, but your greatest opportunity to lead is in front of you. And they're all like, I say that every day. They don't nod like that. Like, what, jokes, but the commander in chief is saying it like it's a big deal. And I love that because, again, the brain seeks symmetry. When it recognizes asymmetry, like why do kids stare at your leg, right? Because it looks different. Because the brain seeks,
babies.
Yes. Oh yeah, especially.
It's weird to me.
Well, but it's a limbic brain thing.
Yes.
It's scanning for a threat, essentially, because asymmetry equals threat in the nature of our kind of primitive upbringing. So, what do you do with that? I call it pressure as a privilege. Those eyes, what are you going to do with that, right? And are you going to be triggered and make it about you, or are you going to be able to tell your story in a way that resonates with them and they can find aspiration in themselves, right? Like people can say, oh man, you're such an inspiration, right? You're like, yeah, but what does that do in the soul mirror to reflect back to you?
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of too is I have this conversation with veterans, is specifically younger veterans, is the thank you for my service thing. Is I hate when, and I'm sure you've heard it too. I hate when people come up to me and thank me for my service. And I said, it's not about you. And you know what I say to every one of those guys? We appreciate your support.
You're worth it.
Thanks for being worth it.
Now act like it, please. Yes. That's the other part. I mean, my Veterans Day message was that, like, hey, to everyone out there today, find a veteran. Don't just thank them though. Ask them their story and listen. And then with that, right, be the type of person, because they thought you were worth it, be the type of person that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Continue pushing that.
Well, and again, I think that like that's the piece about, so not to go political here, right? But the idea of how patriot in general over the last years has been just drugged through the mud. Like somehow that makes you a racist, or somehow that makes it, dude, love for country. Like if I care about this table deeply, I shouldn't expect you to take care of it, right?
Or even care for it.
Or even care for it at all, right? Yeah. And then if everyone took just what was in their sphere of influence or direct connection and just took the ownership of it, like this whole country would turn in a very positive direction. You know?
It would.
And that's why I think small unit leadership is so critical, and as we grow and have grown, it's, it takes like anything in an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur or not, there's, when the organism grows up to from a 50 to 100 to 300, right? Like it's a different culture, but the pillars are the same. Like we have a box over there that's taped off that you guys have seen that's called the sympathy box. You're not going to get pity in here. You won't hear anyone say, I'm sorry that you lost your leg. You say, hey man, that sucks that happened, but what can we do? And that's that paradigm shift. And then the bell, the nautical bell you guys see back there on the wall, that's the breakthrough bell. When a no becomes a yes. And I know in the, obviously it SEALs especially, but special operations community, I'm not ringing that thing.
I saw it sitting over there. I wasn't sure. I'm giving up.
No, same thing. I'm not.
So I stole it from my kids' gymnastics when my girls were in gymnastics, and some girl, it's not even your kid, and they did their first cartwheel. And they're over there ringing the bell. You're like, oh my God, like you're just cheering them on. Well, in here we have so much space. Sometimes someone's over there and they don't see what someone just did. So when that thing rings, it's a moment for everyone to stop and celebrate that person.
Nice.
Because I think back to tribe, it's like, if you can't, we're all walking each other home. If we can't celebrate along the way, we're missing that. There's a lot of work to do in life, but there's a lot of play too. So how do we bring the two in together where it doesn't feel like therapy? Again, this is sneak therapy. They think they're coming in because they lost a leg. No, bro, I care about this. The between the ears, it's the shift from extrinsic worth, value, motivation to intrinsic. Once you give that person that, it's in them, then all of a sudden it's a runaway train of impact, leadership, and positivity.
They can go ignite other people with that same aspect. That's a wonderful approach to it. I saw the bell over here.
The bell, There's a lot of things to look at in this place, man. But
I do want to dive in a little bit more to the detailed aspects of the program that you run here. You said it's a 9-week program. So what does that look like from start to finish? Like if I'm not adaptive, but Dave is. If Dave was going to come here, what would you what would you focus on?
Part of the flagship Redefined program is really about, kind of what I experienced getting ready for the NFL Combine. It was, hey, look, you just come to work every day, attitude and effort, we'll take care of everything else.
Okay.
We fly you here, we house you, we feed you, we train you, we give you all these other educational based tools and otherwise, but your only job is to be willing to go break down to break through. And, in the week progression of 9 weeks, from week 1 is taking inventory, baby. We got to be honest and get real about where we are for reals, right? Then it's about, going and exploring. Then it's about really, there's different weeks that have themes. So grit is one that comes when you start to get past the first 2 weeks and everyone's like, hey, we're so excited to be here. And all of a sudden the soreness and everything, like, oh God, I have to do 9 weeks of this? I'm only at week 3? My God. Eventually you get to 1 week, which is my favorite, which is called kintsugi. Kintsugi is the Japanese art of when a household product like a bowl or a cup is broken. Rather than that item being discarded as no longer worthy, it's glued back together. But not just glued, it's glued with gold flakes, right? And so therefore it has a greater story. Back to the scars as qualifiers, not disqualifiers. Suddenly it's like, hey man, maybe that was a rough day at work for you, but it also has kind of made you uncommon, right? The people come in here and they go, I just want to feel normal. And I get that. As humans, is that sense of belonging. But it's like, I don't have a petri dish to regrow you a leg, bud, you know? So like, how about you adopt words, back to our words and our thinking, as uncommon? Man, uncommon. Oh, that sounds I kind of like that. What do you mean, right? Like, well, your uniqueness gives you the platform. So when you do step on stage and bring your stuff to the light, right? It's healing you also, man. Like I get goosebumps because that fires me up. At my core, I'm a storyteller. And so back to the hero's journey, the ride that they take at week 6,
Josh
7.
Campbell.
Yes. Oh yeah. Big time. Book. Big time. There's times where these athletes, we had a drill sergeant, Army drill sergeant, 20 years, female, couldn't show weakness, right? Stud athlete in a wheelchair, like I said. She comes in with her bags, tears in her eyes. I'm going to quit. I just looked at her and I said, okay, do you want to quit or do you just forget how to ask for help? because I think you're right up against it and you can't balk at this opportunity. Why did you really come here? Because if we can get them to define what they want, then they can be desperate to get it. If people go, well, I just want to be a better version of myself. What does that look like? How do you quantify that?
Define
right?
it.
What is the measurement? Like, how do I know that you're doing that, right? And how do you know that you're doing that? So there's success tracking, and that's empowering. And so, anyway, I've brilliantly borrowed or cleverly rearranged from growing up in church, from Boy Scouts, from football, from 12-step. I mean, dude, you name it. Like, there's a whole host of tools that I just bring in here and self-select which ones I like.
And that's it, is tools. And we often score everybody by their resume. What is the bullet points behind their life?
Yeah. What's the social media clips that we can rather than getting to know the real soul into that?
Yeah. But these bullet points, this resume items, and then we say, no, we have to have some level of normacy.
Yes.
And it doesn't exist like that. Is you build your resume as you go. When you sign the dotted line in the military, you just hit 1% of the population.
Yep.
When you become a veteran, you join that pool.
Yep.
When you join a nonprofit, and so you develop this life story, that bowl is not going to be the same.
Right.
It's going to be very unique.
Right.
And you have to embrace that. And it's okay to be different.
Yeah. In fact, like, that's why God made you that way. Right.
I kind of bring this back to what we said before, kind of this programming is we have a tendency, and I'll be one of those guys that says this, is the veterans have a tendency to get into a victim mentality.
Career wounded warrior.
Yeah.
Moving from charity to charity, sucking the teat.
I call them WWP alumni. Shoot me down for that. But you know what I mean? Is like, we've embraced it. We said, I need the service dog. I need this.
Sure.
Thank me for my service. I'm going to wear the hat. I'm going to be loud about it.
Yep.
And we lose this in special operations. We call it quiet professionalism. We lose that along the way. And other people who don't understand it empower that victim mentality.
Yeah. Well, again, as soon as somebody affirms the story, right, all you're going to do is try to get more and more people on your side. Yeah. Right. And if I think about Jesus's life, like, one, I want to say this boldly because people don't think about this. Christ wasn't a Christian. Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. Okay, let's just be clear on one thing. If you look at Christ's life, what he did constantly and what he does in the Bible is ask really good questions, right? And so even for the person, the veteran out there that's like, I hate when people come up and say, thank you for your service, right? Well, what if you could come up with a clever question back to them that started and ignited a conversation maybe that could surprise you? Yeah. Because if you're coming into it already, posturing toward this thing that you're already expecting, right? You're actually colluding to more of what you say you don't want.
Exactly. You're
It's that negative, intrusive thoughts.
And it ultimately stems from fear or victim or ego, right? And ego is a fearful thought. And so the idea of I deserve is a slippery slope, man.
Oh yeah.
Right? Or the need to be seen as.
Yeah.
Like, my ego shows up like that. I love delivering for people, but if I believe I'm the savior, that don't work.
Dangerous.
That's dangerous, bro.
Dangerous.
In fact, that's going to I will find another bottom that'll be even more painful, because a fool that is consistent in his follies becomes wise. I just don't want to have to do that, right? I think God allows us to mess it up. That's free will. So it expands our capacity to love. Love doesn't have to be woo-foo, hugs, brother, and whatever. It can be deciding that you're going to commit your life to look people in their eyes and treat them whole. If you treat someone broken, they act that way. Right? Like, my kids, the first and last thing I do is I drop them off at school. I say, ask good questions. And I pick them up. What questions did you ask today?
Hold them accountable.
Hold them accountable, And in between, every night we pray the same thing around the dinner table. It says, may we always defend the weak, always do what's right, learn from our mistakes, and never quit. That's our family, the Vobora family mantra. It's posted up at the house. I'm sure one day my kids will make fun of me all across the board. But there's no mention of God. Don't mention religion or anything specific, sect or otherwise. These are 4 principles to live by. And if we do that, that's a true north. So if my daughter gets called to the principal's office because she punched a kid, which happened, and I go in there and they tell me, well, this and that, and my daughter looks at me and goes, I was defending the weak. Take her to ice cream, right? Damn right we take her to ice cream, because you know what? That kid was being picked on and she decided to come and shepherd that thing. Yeah. And so that's where, again, back to your normalcy thing or the opportunity, like, never get in trouble. What a terrible thing to tell a kid.
Yeah.
Right? Because if not, like there may be
how are you going to challenge the environment?
Thank you. And then again, back to how we got into this is the victim side of all of this. It's like the nature of being safe keeps people from sometimes, conflict, but at the same time, conflict can grow us. Yes. And so there's back to our kids, the optimal deprivation or healthy adversity that they face. I'm not the kid who's making my kid walk home next to the car after they had a bad game, but at the same time, I'm going to make sure that when we get in the car and I ask them some questions, that if they didn't try their best, right, that's the only failure.
And they'll realize
once
it themselves.
Again, what do we learn the most from?
Trying.
Is our failures, our trying.
Repetition.
Getting into trouble.
Totally.
Getting blown up.
Yeah.
Getting raped.
Yes,
These things define our characters, and there's two ways we could go about it. There's two paths, right?
Yep.
We let it defeat you,
Yep.
or we let it empower and strengthen you
Yep.
and your position.
Exactly.
It really comes down to a decision, though. It's the decision on how you choose to harness it.
How many wounded veterans, amputees, do you know they get really, really obese?
Tons.
And they say, I can't do it anymore.
Yep.
Yeah, or not even wounded veterans.
So it takes people like you.
Just regular. Regular. Yeah,
just
conventional.
humans.
Yeah.
It takes people like you, people like me to say, hey, I've done it.
Yep.
And maybe it's a more extreme circumstances. God help you if it's a more extreme circumstance, because they go, oh, my situation, if he could do it, I could do it.
Well, I was just watching a clip from that vet. I'm trying to remember his name off the top. I can't think of it. I know I just was looking at it last night, so I'll try to pull it up while I'm talking, but blind and deaf. There's a documentary from Darkness to Triumph on YouTube. Aaron Hale, this guy, I don't know if you guys can even see on that, but Aaron Hale.
Oh, yeah.
And he's all over stuff. Anyway, I haven't watched this yet. I just watched a couple of clips of him and I had to look up this documentary. Yeah. But the point is, at some point, he's like, why me? Everybody has that. That's the synonymous human experience, condition otherwise. But eventually he's like, you know what? I'm going to be the best damn blind and deaf Aaron Hale I can be. And when he said that line, I loved it, because what he didn't say was, I'm going to be the best blind and deaf person ever, right? Because it's not about you versus everybody else. Yeah. It's you versus you. Yep. And who is looking at you in the mirror, right? And how are you willing and able to look at the things that you do and want to progress, but then also look at the things that have gratitude, because gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership, right? You can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. So if that's the case, we need to raise our vibration. Most of the people we serve here come in here in this lower register, which is apathy, guilt, shame, fear, resistance, all these things. Eventually you bump up into acceptance, neutrality, vulnerability, courage, strength. You get up in this upper register eventually to, peace, love, enlightenment, right? Ineffability, if you want to keep going. But this is scientific, right? Like everything is energy. This table it's just vibrating at a slower pace, so it seems more form than we are. Well, when we work with this group, I say this to my staff all the time, it's their duty to make sure they raise their vibration, because you're going to get sponged. This world will sponge you. Peoples and places and things will sponge you. And yet, you can't be the victim that says, oh, hell, this is so hard because, okay, well, did you wake up? When people leave this course and they're not doing well, they call back, hey, man, I'm just not doing well. You know what I'll say? When was the last time you got still and breathed? Because you have those tools. We did it for 9 weeks, right? When was the last time you moved and worked out? Yeah. When was the last time you got cold shower, ice bath, or otherwise? When was the last time you wrote a gratitude letter to the universe? And last one, service. When was the last time you checked on someone else? Because here's the thing, and this is my morning practice. When I wake up, I get cold immediately. Now, luckily, it's getting a little colder. I can just jump in the pool. But cold shower, then I breathe, dynamic breath work for 15 to 20 minutes. Then I write a quick, it can be bullets or a letter, gratitude. Then I go out and usually eat breakfast, train. After I train, now I've done 4 of those 5. Next one is to serve people. Well, I have the benefit of building my life around that and service. So if those are 5 things that are in your control to elevate your vibration, then when things are thrown at you, because life provides the curriculum, you're going to be in a better state to not drop all the way down into the familiar behavioral things that you fired and wired together in your neurology.
You probably went through a phase where it was the opposite, right? All of a sudden, you are giving, and you're like, what is going on here? My energy is just getting sucked dry. It's getting zapped.
Yeah.
So you learn at a certain point during your journey to be a little bit more protective of that as well.
Yeah, we say healthy selfish. I'm not good at it. I'm getting better at it. Yeah. For a while there, I've struggled with substance abuse. I mentioned that. So I would at times be like, I have nothing left to give. I'm going to take a few drinks and then squeeze out whatever I can for the people. But back to what you said is about, people remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. Well, I'm actually pouring that from an empty cup. So what's even that person that's receiving that, it's probably the worst possible thing that I could give them. Yeah. So it's healthy selfish, not in a way that's like, here's my ball and I'm not going to play anymore. It's like, hey, I have the ball, and today I don't have any sneakers to play, so I'm going to wait until tomorrow when I do. And that's, again, I'm not the savior. I can't rescue. I have to recognize that, God has a big purpose in this, and I'm going to trust that tonight I'm going to let it be enough and hit the pillow as well as I can.
That's fantastic. It's a fantastic approach to that.
Don't do it well, but work in progress.
Yeah, well, we're talking a lot about specifically military and veterans, but noticed something the last couple of years, and it's something we've talked about pretty often, is the victim mentality that we're seeing and people just attributing things to trauma. Leaving it there. Well, it's just my trauma.
Yeah.
End of sentence.
Yeah. There's no action to work on the trauma. There's no commitment to be accountable. Yeah.
That's where.
Thanks for the trailer.
Yeah.
Where's the rest of the movie?
And where are you going with this? Right. Yeah. So we see this all the time. I've just embraced my trauma. It's who I am.
Well, there's a lot of groups that do the circle jerk thing. Where it's like, they pour it out, but then there's no accountability to anybody taking action on it. Yes. So it's like, we come back here next week. We just do the same thing over and over and over, and there's never any rooting down.
It's misguided acceptance is what it is. People are like
convenient vulnerability.
Exactly. Well, they're calling it acceptance. I've accepted my trauma. It's just who I am. And if you full stop right there, you're never going to get better. In fact, you're only going to exacerbate those current symptoms, and you're going to lean into that victim mentality even further, especially when you introduce ego to it, right?
Dude, there's this author, Brianna Wiest. She's a German chick. She's amazing. But I just saw her post this the other day. It says, when things want to die, but you keep them alive, they slowly kill you instead.
Yep. Absolutely.
Ooh. Right? Think about it. When you become clear, maybe that's a relationship that is dying, right? And you're just like, I don't want to hurt that person, right? Or I don't want to, well, that is actually, you're conceding something in your truth that is eventually going to swallow you whole. And the collateral damage of that only expands the longer that you let it fester.
I think in just layman's terms, rip the Band-Aid off.
Maybe, yeah. Well, that's good too, because part of that too is in the unit, you had to do that. There was, and so you had the bunch of men around you didn't want to let down. There were hard charging alphas, right? And that you were like, man, no matter what, I am not going to allow myself to be the weak link. But then you transition to civilian life and people are okay with okay. There's some low expectation cultures. And there's some times where you're like, well, I'm gonna punch a hole through this wall because this person is just okay, and that mediocrity, it just breeds contempt.
I think it's also people haven't been challenged enough.
Totally.
And you do it here. You are implementing this here as, hey, we're going to push you to the breaking point. Because when you push that boundary and you recognize that your dreams get a little bit bigger, if you choose that route of resilience and recovery and continuing to serve.
Well, after you do hard things, what you're earning that dopamine, right? No one can take that from you, right? And that isn't outcome based. Right. I mean, look, I got into ultra running a couple of years ago, actually when COVID, because my wife was pregnant with our third and running was my solace. But I trained for, I was a linebacker in the NFL. I was never running farther than catch that guy, And so I went out and I was like, I'm going to see if I can run 10 miles without stopping and see if I die. Well, I didn't die. And the next week I was like, hey, I'm gonna see if I can run a marathon this weekend. And it was 5 hours or something. It was not fast, but I got it done.
Yeah.
And then I was like, dude, it was carry the load time, Memorial Day. And Memorial Day wasn't happening because of COVID. So I got a couple buddies and I was like, will you crew for me? I want to try to run 100 miles in 24 hours. This is 6 weeks into training. I have no idea what I'm doing. Read a Goggins book and they're like, oh, let's do this. You know what I mean? And it was magic because I was hallucinating. I was pissing blood. I couldn't walk for a few days, right? My wife's calling me an idiot, which I was. But at the same time, something was unlocked in me, right? Yeah. And then it was, I'm going to do Leadville. And then I'm going to do rim to rim to rim of the Grand Canyon. And we crush and crush. And there's all these different things. And the lesson is, which I did not finish Leadville, by the way. One day I will. But in the now is that's a failure on the DNF, right? But oh, buddy, was that a learning experience?
Sure.
And so that's the truth is sports like that where you versus you, right? And it was such a spiritual path. It's like a moving meditation.
The body overcomes, or the mind overcomes the body.
Yes. And when that chatter gets really loud, right? That voice in your head that doesn't pay rent, you can just kind of chuckle at it. You just become the witness to it.
And what do we say in business all the time is, hey, why are we stressed about this? No one's shooting at you.
No one's shooting at us anymore.
Right? That's a good line. I'm going to start using that in here.
It's because, we're when you've been through that and you've been through your head, if I train marathons, my entire, up to a marathon every day, and that's what I know is, and the average thought process is the marathon is the big boy, right, for running. And then it takes others around us to realize, hey, there's a 100-miler there too. Okay. Now I'm going to challenge myself to that next step. So oftentimes you could be the best in your own world at the marathon, but if you don't consistently push those boundaries, how are you going to understand the world?
So one thing that you talked about is just community or culturally wise, like where there's this sense of entitlement, right? And I do believe that social media plays drastically into this, right? 100%. Like then they get these little hits of chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin, and then they compare themselves. And then there's this like, well, I have to be doing this or else I'm not worthy.
Yes.
And it's like, it's like, okay, if that gave you permission because you witnessed someone going beyond what you thought was even humanly possible, what does that call to you? And then be true to that. It may be like, hey, dude, today, like I've never even ran. I'm going to try to run a mile. Like start where you are and progress that in a way that means that that you're not trying to get to the destination to receive the gift. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the outcome-based thinking. It's like driving a boat and trying to look at the wake at the same time. You don't have a rearview mirror, take it off. But if that's the case and you're looking at the wake, eventually if you're staring at the wake to see what you're creating, you're always going to be, at a danger of running into something.
Yes.
And so that's a piece that I try to be completely focused, completely present, and outcomes will take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. That's a really good metaphor. I've not heard that before.
Yeah.
We talk about different metaphors within business all the time, but that's a unique one, especially being able to rely on people behind you, right?
Yep.
Like you've got here at ATF.
Yep.
I think you've built something really amazing here.
Well, everyone on staff, Josh is a veteran, but everybody on staff is a former athlete, college or pro. Okay. And so I think that back to the synonymous mindset and all that, it's very synergistic in the way that we know. And you know what, there's times too where after 9 weeks of intense what we do in the 10th week trip, I give them a week. Like, hey guys, victory Monday, Tuesday, take a couple days, and then let's get back in the saddle after action and we'll move on to the next one because it's a heavy mental, emotional drain or application on a consistent basis to deal with people on this level.
So what's the future look like for ATF?
Crazy good. I'm so grateful, man. 10 years in to be where we're at. The product is badass, man. The culture is incredible. The future is I just secured 5 acres in Argyle, about 30 minutes west of where we are right now.
Okay.
And I'm building a 30,000 square foot performance space, an entire housing unit that'll be able to house 24 athletes at a time. It's $20 million to go vertical. We've got $12 million raised. I'm going to establish an endowment. That's another $20 million. So that the goal is own the ground, own the infrastructure, establish the endowment. There'll actually be a frontage building on 377. That'll be a synergistic partner. There'll be a for-profit yield also to cover some overhead. Okay. But the goal is financial sustainability for the next 50 to 100 years. And with that, then anything that is fundraised is going to go into the empowerment of hiring athletes for opportunities to train others like them. And then as we think about growth model, because this will be one of one, we actually partner with F45 in Wahlberg. It's internal right now, but they're going to be the first to go to market publicly to open their doors to people with disabilities. Wow, in fact, beautiful. Noah Galloway, who's an Army cat and was on Dancing with the Stars.
Love Noah.
Noah's a great friend. He's one of their featured athletes and doing a bunch of stuff right now. And he's such a stud. Like he doesn't even need to really adapt stuff. He just
does it.
Yeah.
Does it.
So anyway, to me, it's like, look, the world has enough gyms. We don't need 100 of these. I don't want to manage that model, that infrastructure. But if we have a mothership that is the R&D laboratory that is deploying these findings and methodologies in creative and meaningful growth models, some for-profit, some nonprofit, now all of a sudden we can move the needle to the large 40 million Americans that have a disability. Not to say all 40 are interested, right? Let's say 5 million of them are, well, cool. That's a pretty significant pool of fish from, and let's get that. I think the byproduct of, to your point, the permission slip is they're going to see those that are and then go, okay, man, like it's time for me too.
Yeah. They'll be inspired at the very least.
Yeah. At the end of the day, what we do is we invest deeply in people, earning their trust. We don't sit on the sideline. We wade into the water with them. They're learning to swim and we're getting dunked and we're, you know what I mean? And through that process, it's just super cool to watch people eventually come face to face with that old version and then recognize when they can use it as the stepping stone, right? To shed the skin to become that next one.
Yeah.
Like that's the crack in this, right? Like that's the piece that, man, I couldn't imagine any better way to be spending my time than doing that.
Yeah. And along the way, you're improving yourself every day because you're facing new challenges. As a business owner, as an entrepreneur, there's a different challenge every day, which gives you no ceiling, right? Because every day is dynamic.
Well, especially when you come home with 3 kids. Although the other night, guys, I came home and pulled in the driveway. They're playing soccer. I've got 11 and 9 are girls and 4 is little man. And I open my door to the car and they're singing the national anthem. It was like, I literally put my arms like this. Like, my wife walked out and I was just like, she's like, what? I was like, this is the coolest thing ever, right? Yeah. There it is. My second grader had to learn the Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution, to memorize it.
Yeah.
So then the 4-year-old, her repping it, then he picked it up. So I don't know, man. I'm grateful to be in Texas. I'm grateful to have such incredible support. These corporations that have gotten behind us, Boeing to name one, has gone for sure over about $500,000 and a half with us.
Wow.
It's just amazing when I can go and speak and tell these amazing stories of these athletes. Mm-hmm. And then I step off stage and these people go, what do you need? Right. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, we need a 5-year sponsorship, $100K every year, title sponsor. I'm like, done. Because again, I think philanthropy is meaningful. It's heartfelt, it's goodwill, but really it roots back to marketing. Yep. People bet on people. Yeah. So veteran or not, these indomitable spirits and human wills in here are something that is good business, right? Mm-hmm. It's good culturally to align with. And so I think that's where we've been very dynamic in how we connect with individuals giving, family offices, corporations, organizations, and grants and otherwise, to be able to make sure that this thing's 100% cost-free for everyone.
It's really quite beautiful. So let's on a personal note, right? Let's talk about this. As we found our identity, we found our passion, our purpose in what you do. You had mentioned that you put this armor on in the past, right? And that was in football, right? To mask all of this stuff. Do you feel like you've shed that armor and opened yourself up?
I have.
And my second piece to that is, what is something, because you're obviously far along in your journey and you're in a different place than most people, what's something that you recognize maybe as a weakness in yourself that you're working on to better yourself in that environment?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think the first part, football-wise, I'd been out of the league 2 whole seasons, and Sean Lee had gotten hurt, Cowboys linebacker. And my agent called me and said, hey, you're in Dallas. Cowboys if you pass the physical, they're going to sign you. And Clint Bruce, that SEAL, was sitting across from me in my office at Trident at his place. And I hung up the phone, and he could tell I was just sort of in my head. And he said, do you want me to tell you what I think you're thinking? Yes, sir. He said, I think football is familiar, but what you're doing out here with these guys, it's the most powerful thing that you're called to. I called my agent back and I said, I'm retired. At that moment, one, I could actually watch football again without, as a fan, not in my head and otherwise, scouting and doing it like a business or like a job. But then the other piece was all of a sudden now I started to shed that layer of the identification with. I stopped introducing myself. I mean, podcasts will do it and otherwise is the resume, but I stopped. One of the last things I'll do, if I'm on a plane or otherwise, I won't talk about football at all, and they're like, well, what got you into this? Well, and eventually it may come out down the road, but rather than being like, well, I'm this former NFL football player, as if that's some because I felt this sort of egoic piece to it.
It's part of your identity.
Yeah, it's part of the identity. Yeah. And so as I've sort of redefined that now, and what I work on in me is, I can be blinded very easily through passion, and I don't want to let people down, and so back to that, the complex that is, if I don't deliver, I'm not worthy. And, I had a coach I worked with for a long time who helped me greatly. And he said, DV, you're a human being, not a human doer. Stop trying to do to be worthy. Your state right now is enough. Imagine what you can do now as you work from that, right? Because it's freedom from the identification with football equals freedom for, what do I fill that with?
Yeah.
Right? Well, did with drugs for a minute, right? That was destructive. Can't sustain that. All right, well, what's a constructive way to repattern?
Yeah. Question for you. This is something that I'm working on. I can't just dish a hard question out without
Come on, share your laundry.
Is being static doesn't mean I'm not successful.
Yes. Or not doing a soul crushing workout, doing something soft, in the sauna and stretching today can be that.
Yeah. Yes. It doesn't mean you have to smell like ammonia after your workout every time. Right? Yes. But and that's something I work with too, is very passionate about what we do, and we're always on the move and, traveling and all this stuff. And when I get back home and I sit on the couch, for a minute in front of the TV, I'm like, I am a shitbag.
Totally.
I know that high drivers are struggling with that all the time.
Yeah.
But it's okay to be. It's okay to exist. It's okay to recover, recharge, recalibrate, settle down a little bit, because you're going to become, with that mindfulness,
I think a lot of these chargers like you are if you look back to science, like Huberman does a great job as a neurologist, speaking to certain things. So there's this index neuron. So what the science says is your brain, think of it like a computer, the hard drive space. It only has 18 hours in a day to be able to record data that can be then through the index neuron reached into and pulled out of the pot for future. In fact, some would argue it's actually 12 to 16, but nonetheless, there's a finite window. Yes. So as we do, right, squeeze out another hour, we're not really retaining it. So the question is, like Einstein, not memorizing certain things that were irrelevant. This is the same thing. It's like, what are you allowing headspace to hold you captive where you're not freeing up? And if you think of it tactically as a performer, then you can kind of give yourself the space to say, in fact, I'm allowing that hard drive to refresh, clean, and otherwise. So maybe that's a way to convince yourself. And if nothing else, be your own guinea pig. Try intentionally getting still and not we think we're all tough, right? We think we're all big. Either get still and shut your eyes for an unknown amount of time and see how long you can sit in it. Or get in front of a mirror and stare at yourself and see how long you can do that, right? If you can't sit in for 5 minutes without falling apart, right, or turning away, you probably like yourself a little bit. And you know what? You get really good at that and you start to have some self-love. Think about what you can offer from that space.
Confidence will also boost up and bring out the best qualities in yourself. Believe in yourself. Don't let those intrusive thoughts beat you up.
Well, a horse doesn't have those thoughts. You could ride a horse all day up at high altitude and you could know that thing's tired.
Humanity's greatest curse.
Yeah, it is. Self-awareness. It's the self-awareness, right? They're like, okay, well, they told me to go. I'm going to go again, right? Or they told me to rest. Perfect.
Well, David, it's been fantastic talking to you and having you share your story. This definitely went in a direction that I really appreciate, and I think a lot of people it'll resonate with. Cool. What's some maybe a final word or a thought that you have to the audience, maybe that you say that could, either motivate them, inspire them?
Yeah, so I'll share a quick story. I was walking into a 7-Eleven one night with a combat engine Marine, great friend, Jacob Schick, guy that I think you guys know, CEO of One Tribe. And, it was late. I'm sure we weren't going in there to buy anything healthy. And a homeless guy came running up to us and he stops us. And I actually kind of wrote him off past Jake, went into the store, I looked back through the glass and realized that Jake was still caught with this guy. And so I walked back out and witnessed this exchange. He'd reached in his pocket, Jacob did, and pulled out a $5 bill, goes to hand it to the homeless guy who, keep in mind, hadn't yet made eye contact. He had stopped him and was kind of head down, wasn't engaging as a human-to-human exchange. And Jake, when he hands him the bill, holds on real tight. Guy grabs it, turns, and realizes the bill is not coming with it. And he's forced then to turn and look up and look Jacob in his eyes. And this is what I witnessed. It says, "You're worth it." And let's go with the money. Guy takes it, turns toward me, going to the 7-Eleven, gets to the door, then doubles back and goes, What did you say? Jacob says, actually reaches down and lifts up his pants leg, revealing his prosthetic foot. He says, "What I did for this country, I did for you. You're worth it." Had nothing to do with the amount of money, right? Had everything to do with Jacob making the guy look him in his eyes as a human and say, "You're worth it." The guy turned, walked down the sidewalk, around the building, out of sight. Didn't go in the store. I don't know where that man is today, right? I can't speak to the total outcome, but that wasn't the point. Because my job was, right? I'm witnessing this exchange, right? And so I say that to say this, to anyone listening, if you feel stuck, if you feel like you're built for more, right? But you're like, I'm not Dave Vobora. I can't start this whole thing, or it's start where you are, right? It's the opportunity. My favorite definition of leader is by Napoleon Bonaparte, a guy you don't want to quote too publicly too often, but I love him. He said, "A leader is a dealer of hope." Right? Hope is a priceless currency. It's like water will die without hope. And so holding a door for someone today, asking somebody that looks in pain, "What's your story?" Right? That may be my kids. They've grown up around this. They ask for a wheelchair Barbie every year. If they get a normal Barbie, they rip the leg out. So it's like their friends, this is their, and so homeless people, my parents, we used to pick people up on the way to church, right? And it taught that compassion was interruptive. It wasn't always convenient, but it was a choice to be then this higher calling of self. Yeah. And so that's a piece that I just encourage people, find a way today. And in fact, if it's something, maybe you share a history of abuse, maybe something specifically in your story that is a trigger for you, try to find someone enduring something similar. Because again, that's how you grow to the point you've already made. And that's how you go beyond what that thing was that was trying to keep you in those old behaviors and those old patterns. Just find somebody to connect with, be honest in that exchange. And maybe like we started this whole talk off with, it's just asking them about them. Yeah. Not saying shit about yourself.
Be curious, not judgmental.
Always.
Beautiful.
Appreciate you guys.
Appreciate you, David. You're a beautiful and an inspirational human being.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing.
Well, it's an honor to have you guys here. I think you got a couple more to go, so I'll get out of the hot seat.
Yeah. No, this is the best seat.
This is it.
We appreciate every story. Every word counts. That's why we do it. Yep. Passion project for us. So thanks for being a part of it. And we're excited to build a relationship because we're going to be back here. Maybe I'll join your program here. Get me back into shape.
Bro, I think you're going to be just fine. I told you this when you walked in here because the other thing we do is a week-long condensed. It's like daily double style. And not that you're changing the physiology that greatly during a week, but it's sharpening like, okay, what is it, where are the ways and things that you're doing that are so repetitive because it's the way you've done it that we can change a couple things up and you see the huge benefits of that
Mix
stuff.
it up.
Plus, having a guy like you here with the introspection and the work that you've done and the, you know what I mean? It's a byproduct that you're going to elevate those around you. So we're very much looking at those people too. And it's not always the most impaired, it's also that person that's like, maybe they got a little bit of a head start, but maybe they can then bring these others up. And
beautiful.
You went through selection. You get it.
Part of the tribe.
That's
my
right.
friend. I love it. So thank you, David.
You got it.
Thanks a lot. This has been the Medevac Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us at medevacpodcast.com or Instagram at Medevac Podcast. Go reach out there. We like hearing from you guys. See you next week.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.